Congratulations to you young people. My heart is so full just meeting you. I am amazed by what you're doing. So I just want to feel the power in this room. There is so much goodness in this room and so much power. Collectively, we have so much power to change the world. And we are changing the world, and we're doing it. You're doers. You're movers and you're shakers and you're doers. So I'm very happy to be in your presence. I'm very excited. And I just want to thank all of the 14 organizations that honor these young people. You clearly are very respectful of youth, and you are affirming goodness in them, and I don't feel we do that enough in our society, certainly not in the media. And, you know, students rock. I mean, you all really rock. And And I would like to hear a little bit from you first, because you didn't get to make remarks up here. But as Margaret said, I've worked in war zones. I've also done anti-gang work. I'm a professor at American University in Georgetown teaching nonviolent struggle. I've done a lot in the field of peace and social justice. So I'd like to hear any questions that you might have of me first, rather than me wah, wah, wah up here like on Charlie Brown in the Peanuts commercial. Could I hear from you first? I'm a pretty intuitive person. I have my antenna out a lot, so I'd like to know a little bit more about you and what might be on your mind. Do you have any questions you want to ask about this? Anything that comes to mind that you'd like me to address in particular?
I'm not a student, but what sparked, obviously you've been very dedicated, motivated, it's beautiful, you know, everything. What sparked your first interest?
Okay. My own background? My first interest? Sure, I can address that.
I mean, these are young people, so
Yeah.
I'm curious how.
Yep. Well, it sounds like they're well on their way, but you know, my story is a little bit interesting. Could I hear from the young people first before the adults raise their hand? Yes, ma'am.
Out of all of your experiences, can you think of maybe one moment where your hope in humanity was just so happy with your life?
Did everybody hear that? Was there one moment that I saw the real hope in humanity? Was there a moment that I confronted where it really restored my faith in humanity? That's it? That's a great question. Okay, a moment in time. I can definitely address that. Yes, ma'am.
What do you think is the most effective tool against apathy?
Wow, that's a good one. Most effective tool against apathy. Brilliant questions. Okay, you are. Yes.
As an advocate of nonviolence, how do you approach situations where you're trying to stop violence? Like, what are your strategies? Because I know she mentioned that you went to, I think, Uganda in South America to stop the killing of youths and other teenagers.
Yes, I've worked in about 12 war zones, and the book you're holding in your lap is a treasure trove of ideas around that. I probably won't be able to do it all justice, but I can do it some justice. So nonviolent strategies in dangerous situations, right? Excellent question. Okay. And other young people, please. Well, we'll have another opportunity, right? Well, is this the only other opportunity, or I can do it at the end as well? And sir, you had a hand in the back?
I did. I was just curious, what, in terms of your own personal safety, like where do you draw the line?
Where do I draw the line on my personal safety? Okay, that's a good question. Personal safety. Yes. You never want to endanger people deliberately. And was there another adult? Yes, ma'am.
What was the scariest thing? What was the scariest thing? Is it the danger of the moment, or how people will react or not react?
Mm-hmm. And these two questions are related, because the most dangerous situation I confronted also restored my faith in humanity. Okay, well that will give me a little bit to start, some traction to start. And I will say that my parents were a huge influence on me about what got me started. My father started an underground newspaper against the Nazis when he was 14 years old in Poland, and he fled the Nazis in 1939, and our family was burned in the ovens by the Nazis. He came to this country and eventually became a U.S. diplomat, and we lived all over the world. And he worked for civil rights and social justice as a Jew. He married my mother, who was an Episcopalian from New Zealand, and this was frowned upon for Christians and Jews to get married back in the 40s and the 50s. They raised an interfaith family, which really embraced all religions. And my father said to me, I don't care if you bring home a young man who is purple, green, orange, striped, polka dot, whatever, as long as he wants to improve his mind. Just make an old man happy and let me walk you down the aisle. Are you listening up there? So eventually I did, and it was a great, great marriage. And it still is. So that's a little bit about how I got started. My mom was very involved in Native American causes because she had a Native American history teacher. And he taught her about the Trail of Tears. So both of my parents were involved in civil rights, African American rights, Native American rights, and that planted the seeds. How to most effectively counter apathy. I think the Quakers teach us. The Quakers are the best at this, is each one teach one, and to model the life that we should lead. And the fact that you are doing all that you're doing is spreading a ripple effect out in the community, that you're expressing care and concern and compassion. You are modeling the change we wish to see in the world, and people do see that that's effective. And now we're affirming and honoring you through these awards, and that will further highlight and further amplify your voices. So I think people who are apathetic need more information, that we need to raise critical awareness. Like Paulo Freire, the famous Brazilian educator, called it conscientization. We need to give them new and other and different sources of information, because research shows the more we listen just to the news media, the more depressed we become. The news media misframes violence and doesn't give us solutions often, or people can't get a handle on how can I help. So it's not always that they're apathetic, but they don't know where to start. So if we can give them just a tiny little hook, a tiny little handle to get involved, and give them really simple, straightforward, basic things to do, sometimes it really helps get going. I took a really apathetic friend to a peace rally once, and she said, wow, this is like a parade. I didn't know peace could be so joyful, and people are singing and marching, and she had never been exposed to a peace rally before. So sometimes it's just bringing them along and seeing for themselves. My own background in the most violent, dangerous situation I confronted was up on the northern Colombia border, where we had organized a peace village because so many of the residents in that area had been targeted either by the Colombian military or by the FARC, the Front for the Liberation of Colombia, and the Revolutionary Front. And these villagers wanted to be neutral in the Colombian Civil War. They did not want to take sides. They did not want to be forced to serve with either the guerrillas, the paramilitaries, or the military. So they called in a group called Peace Brigades International, and I was the director here in the United States operation. Now, Peace Brigades was started by Gandhian disciples, Quakers, and Buddhists in Canada in 1981 to continue Gandhi's vision of a nonviolent army, Shanti Sena, the truth force. And Gandhi envisioned people standing between warring factions to act as neutral peace observers. So Peace Brigades International was set up on those principles. They go in as neutral peace observers, and Quaker, Mennonite, Church of the Brethren, and other pacifist churches help support them. So do governments around the world and labor unions. They have about 70 sources of funding. So these peaceful residents of Northern Colombia invited us to come in and said, please protect us, please come and walk side by side with us so when the death squads come, we won't get killed. And so we did deploy to this area with 2 years of nonviolence training. We must speak the language of the area where you deploy into these war zones. We have a very careful methodology. It's about 50 pages because we don't want to put the villagers at greater risk. So we make sure that we have enough resources to stay for a very long time. And Peace Brigades International serves in 12 war zones around the world. They've been in Guatemala for 30 years. They don't just parachute in and leave. So we arrived in what was called San Jose de Apartado, which is an oasis of peace and nonviolence in the midst of one of the longest civil wars, certainly in this hemisphere. And fortunately, we may be seeing the light at the end of the tunnel with that war now. And we were living with 1,600 villagers and their families when 200 masked armed gunmen arrived with ski masks and huge weapons. And they knocked down the gates of the Peace Village, and they started dragging people from their dwellings, and they were going to line them up and kill them. And we came out from our tents and our dwellings, and we said, we are neutral peace observers under the Inter-American Commission for Human Rights. We are here to protect these villagers. They are neutral in the Civil War, and they just, tried to tell us to shut up and get out of the way. They cursed at us. They did have beepers on their belts and weapons and satellite phones. We immediately activated our emergency networks around the world on the satellite phones way out in the rainforest and the jungle. We lit up the phones in Bogota, London, New York, Paris, Washington, D.C., in parliaments and Congress around the world, and our grassroots emergency response networks with Peace Brigades International has been building up for 30 years. And they began to bombard the Colombian army and all kinds of people with faxes, emails, phone calls. And we, in the meantime, had multiple teams from multiple countries, about 40 nationalities represented on these peace teams. We act as unarmed bodyguards for human rights. So we carry no weapons, but we stepped out of our dwellings with our Canadian passports, our French passports, our US passports, our New Zealand passports, Polish, Japanese, Venezuelan, from nationalities all over the world. And we said, if you kill these villagers, you're going to have to kill us too. And then you're going to have the wrath of all of these governments down on your head. You're going to have the media here, a massacre of 40 internationals. So we used our white privilege, our northern privilege, our passports as a way of defending these people. And within about a half an hour, 20 minutes, the beepers on these men's belts went off, abort mission, because someone above in the chain of command had given the orders down the line that they did not want witnesses. Peace Brigades basically acts as eyewitnesses to try and protect the lives of others. And we were willing to put our bodies on the line in that regard, and we had had very careful training around this for a really long time. But we had also built up an infrastructure of protection. And we had met military commanders and police officers and government leaders and all of the people who are the intellectual architects of massacres up the chain of command. So Peace Brigade seeks to interrupt cycles of violence on the ground, face to face with those who are about to be massacred. And we also try to interrupt cycles of violence all the way up the chain of command and at the highest levels of government. And we were not successful on another occasion where villagers were not under our protection. Villagers were killed in the town of San Jose de Apartado when Peace Brigades was not walking with them at the time, not living with them 24 hours a day. This was the 11th Brigade of the Colombian military massacred a wonderful peace leader. And so for one of the first times we testified in Congress that we knew who had done it. We knew that the Colombian military had massacred and tortured his family. We testified in Congress, and we got military aid to Colombia cut off for 3 years. That's your tax dollars. Under the Leahy Amendment. The Leahy Amendment is very important. It says we should not give military aid to countries who commit gross human rights violations. So we were successful in stopping military aid. So that was both a time when I was very endangered, but also restored my faith in humanity because the emergency response networks worked. People actually, and those of you who are running the amnesty clubs, thank you because you were a part of that. You helped save those villagers. So Amnesty, Human Rights Watch, all the human rights groups rallied. And you often don't hear about this kind of peace work because the violence didn't happen. So it's like, how do you measure the absence of something, right? So peace brigades, Christian peacemaker teams, Quaker peace teams, there are about 14 of these organizations now operating in war zones around the world, and they're protecting the lives of villagers and students and children walking to school every day so they don't get killed. But you don't hear about it in the news because it actually didn't happen. So, you know, the news isn't going to report on that, right? If it bleeds, it leads is usually what happens if you have a sexy headline, and that's when the public hears about it. So that was both probably one of the most dangerous situations I encountered, but it also was one of the most hopeful because it worked. And I will say that nonviolence is working every day all over the world in millions and millions of ways that we often don't measure and we often don't know about. And there are millions and millions and millions of micro-level efforts for peace going on. And you're a part of that human chain. I mean, you're living the nonviolence, the human dignity, the social justice, and all of the values that embodies. So I've read your bios twice now because Margaret sent them to me about a month and a half ago, and then in the program today, and I'm just very, very impressed with what you're doing, and I want to thank you very much. I want to say in my remarks that all of us have the capacity for compassion, empathy, and peace and nonviolence. And early childhood development specialists have found this over and over again. Jeremy Rifkin is a famous scientist, political theorist, and energy specialist, and he talks about an empathetic civilization, that we're actually moving towards a world empathetic civilization. And there are great marks around this, great signs and indicators that this is happening. When the earthquake in Haiti happened, there was a global embrace rushing to help the victims of Haiti. When the tsunami hit in Aceh, Indonesia, and Sri Lanka, there was a global embrace. People rushed to help, and Americans had an outpouring. So we do have this instinct, and I feel like there is a yearning for everyone to be interconnected in the world. There's a lot of evidence of this, and there's new forms of human organization that we're seeing. We're seeing more and more exchange programs, more and more young people going to study abroad. I've supervised hundreds of interns over the years, and I have, of course, hundreds of students at the university. And they want to be involved in volunteerism as you are. They want to be involved in compassion and social justice and human rights. And more of them are going overseas. These international exchange programs are globalization from below. We have tremendous globalization from above with corporations and the concentration of power at the top a lot. But more importantly, we have citizen-to-citizen globalization. We have more and more interracial marriage among young people. We have more and more tolerance programs, anti-bullying programs, acceptance. This is incredible to me. We are seeing more and more of a sharing economy. How many of you go on that internet site called Etsy? Itsy Bitsy, is that what it's called? Etsy? And they're sharing their crafts and their goods and exchanging them on the internet and bypassing the big corporate control of that. It's amazing to me, and there's lots of sites like this where artisans and students and craftspeople are sharing in the sharing economy. We are seeing new forms of power, such as wind, energy, solar, geothermal, which will create more human-scale societies. E.F. Schumacher talked about how small is beautiful, and creating communities, decentralized communities, where we would have greater control over our sources of energy, will create greater peace. We would not have to go to war over oil in places like the Middle East. These are the best controlled by small communities. This will entail a very different power structure from fossil fuels and financial capitalism. So I have great hope for that we could have a global environmental recovery race instead of global arms races. And I throw down the challenge to all of us to live our lives, to live lightly on the land, to consume less. And this new structure would be networked and decentralized and inherently more democratic. There is increasing evidence that a sharing economy is emerging in different parts of the world because wealth has become concentrated in the hands of the 1% too often. So people are trying to find ways around that, to do an end run around that, and share with their neighbors. As a result of the mortgage crisis and financial meltdown and debt, force people to cooperate and pool resources. We've seen this now in many, many places in Chile, Venezuela, Greece, Turkey, and elsewhere. I witnessed such a spirit of caring and cooperation at the Occupy Wall Street encampments. We had over 1,600 Occupy Wall Street encampments, and it was fully on display. People were sharing food, music, medicine. We also saw this during the Arab Spring with nonviolent struggles in the city squares and in the roundabouts in Yemen, Egypt, Tunisia, Bahrain. And when people band together nonviolently to share music and medicine and food and political debate, this mass, global, collective spirit of uplift is known as collective effervescence. They have actually documented this now in scientific research, and it gives people greater strength and inner peace. Some of the Hindu traditions in India, in the Ganges River, shows this collective effervescence spirit. In my own neighborhood in Arlington, we have now adopted this ethos, this kind of value system. So we swap outgrown clothes among the kids, the 28 kids on the block. We organize block parties and yard sales. We shop for each other at the farmer market. We share vegetables from our garden. We offer each other our homes if somebody's in need of extra housing during the holidays. We provide free childcare for each other for long work days and school closings and snow. We also help the elderly on our block. The teenagers shovel their driveways and sidewalks. They rake their leaves. We're all helping the elderly on the block. And the teens also mow their lawns and help them clean out their attics and go grocery shopping for them. And we're all doing that. And the senior citizens, in turn, have helped the young people so much. Find internships, write letters of recommendation for college for them. I mean, it's this whole symbiotic relationship going on. The neighborhood almost operates like a commune, my sisters told me. And such strong communities prevent violence. The research has found when you weave a strong social fabric in a community, in a neighborhood, it serves as a brake on violence. This is very important, and of course such models work in schools as well. You are knitting such a social fabric in your schools where you're taking up the cause of community. We've found that talking circles and school speak-outs and community conferences show this kind of respect. We do want to hold youth accountable who may have injured others, and we want to make formal agreements to make amends, but we also want to foster greater communication and active listening and keeping students safe in circles. And I work a lot with restorative justice circles in prisons, in neighborhoods with gangs, and in schools, and I can tell you they really work. I work with one of the most dangerous neighborhoods in Boston with a group called La Roca, which is the Rock. And these are ex-offenders that are now using peacemaking circles like the Quakers have taught us to restore and repair relationships. We also are seeing many, many other kinds of models, and people are really questioning who is benefiting from global violence, who is really reaping the rewards of this. Could we reorganize our societies in a way that we don't benefit from violence? We're asking, what could peaceful responses look like? Why are they always perceived as weak? Are nonviolent responses applauded and glorified and magnified as much as violence in our society? What choices can we make? We do have the power to choose. What have we learned from campus tragedies like Virginia Tech or Howard University or Bowie State, where there was roommate-on-roommate violence or mass shootings? What could have been done differently? in the community, by the parents, by the educators, the teens? Could we be in community more and opening up lines of communication? I submit that youth violence is merely a reflection of adult violence. When youth commit violence, they are holding up a mirror to adult society. And they are showing us the values that we embody and foster in our homes, our neighborhoods, and our society. When adults and national leaders endorse war and resort to violence to solve international conflicts, our children absorb those values and practices and images into their belief systems and their psyches. Many children are also raised to believe that war is inevitable. They are raised to believe that the human race is inherently violent and will always live with war. Well, I'm here to challenge that notion when there is a preponderance of evidence to indicate that the human race is inherently more cooperative, or we would not have survived this long as a species. When combat and fighting are the only solutions shown in the popular media and in our textbooks, our children learn this lesson all too well. I have done a textbook analysis of the 17 most popular textbooks in the United States, and most of them are periodized around wars. Very few, if ever, do they talk about peace movements, nonviolent responses to international conflicts. And of course, television influences our behavior. If it didn't, the corporations would not invest billions of dollars in advertisements. So we know that television has a huge influence on children's lives. This premise is further reflected and embedded in U.S. economic policies with the highest level of spending for war in the world, in the United States, more than our top 5 adversaries combined. Children who are brought up to believe in the inevitability of war are much less likely to work for peace. This is what the research shows, that it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. We bring up young people to believe that war will always be with us, and they say, why should I work for peace? It's a fait accompli. So you see, it's a reinforcing system of logic. We have to interrupt that cycle of violence. We have to question that. Conversely, research shows that children who see adult role models working actively for peace and the rights of others believe they will live to have a more extended future, secure future. They learn greater responsibility and are more likely to respond to violence with skills rather than force. So I want to congratulate the parents who are in the audience, because clearly you brought up your young people to believe that peace is possible, or they wouldn't be doing all of these amazing projects in their schools. So I want to say the good news is that war, resistance to war, and movements against violence and war is building worldwide. And it may be reaching a critical mass in the near future. This seems like an outrageous claim when so many people are dying in wars and in armed conflicts, yet there is increasing evidence. We can hasten the demise of war by teaching nonviolence and peace education in the schools, by sharing with our neighbors and others, a sharing society. We can also work with soldiers. They are among the greatest peace leaders. In fact, these last few decades, the peace movements were led by soldiers. Gold Star Families for a Peaceful Tomorrow, 9/11 Families for a Peaceful Tomorrow. There is growing evidence, even inside the military academies, that they want to see a shift from war fighting to large-scale humanitarian reconstruction. And many armies are moving in this direction in New Zealand, Australia, Europe. They know war is not making us safer. They've been to Iraq and Afghanistan, and they have a lot more information around this than even we do. But 500,000 soldiers have come back with post-traumatic stress disorder. So war is not normal. And they know that it's not normal in the overall scheme of things. And they are the last in the world who want to go to war. and they're asking us to find alternative solutions. So I work with many of the military academies and West Point, the Naval Academy, the Air Force Academy. I work with Captain Paul Chappell, Lieutenant Colonel David Grossman, Veterans for Peace, and many other countless soldiers who are speaking out and teaching for peace. One very encouraging phenomenon that I've seen is that nonviolent revolutions are increasing exponentially. Since 1974, over 60 countries have transitioned from dictatorships to democracies using Gandhi's nonviolent principles and strategies. The spring of 2011 saw massive tectonic shifts in the Middle East. Now, the outcomes are very unclear. We have a lot of backsliding. We have a repressive global pushback by military dictatorships and armies, and of course in Syria. But many, many, many millions of people have attempted to change the unjust conditions in their societies using nonviolence. At one point, we had over 60% of humanity engaged in nonviolent struggle, from Tiananmen Square to El Salvador to all the different places in the Middle East. I actually teach intensive courses on this. But in the Middle East, Asia, and Europe in the 1940s, and our own civil rights movement is a huge, huge model for us. Imagine if the civil rights struggle in the United States had not been nonviolent. What have African Americans taught us? They are the moral compass of our nation. African Americans have modeled for us how to shift a culture of intolerance and bigotry and hatred using nonviolence. Thomas Kuhn first suggested in 1962 that a set of ideas, theories, or schools of thought known as paradigms can become dominant, self-reinforcing, self-perpetuating. In his book, The Structure of Scientific Revolution, Kuhn posits that paradigms are born out of society's structures such as race, gender, and class. These paradigms become a system of logic unto themselves, although they may be fundamentally flawed. Then research flows and stems from these flawed paradigms and flawed outcomes. Such was the case when people thought the world was flat. People actually believed that at one time. People and societies come to believe or depend entirely on these flawed paradigms, which only serve the interests of a narrow few. This is true of today's war system. Can you think of other paradigms that everyone believed at one time in history that we now would laugh at, would scoff at? When else have we seen paradigm shifts, huge tectonic shifts?
The Earth circling the sun.
Lynching. We used to put these leeches to suck out the blood of patients to get rid of diseases, right? And it often killed the patient. There was another one over here.
Earth circling the sun.
Who invented that theory that challenged that paradigm?
Challenge. Copernicus.
Copernicus. Who was Copernicus? Wonderful Polish scientist. They tried to run him out of town, right? And who said the Earth was not flat?
Boko Haram said it's not, it's flat. That's one of the reasons they fight against Islamic education.
Right, but who was Galileo? Right? And what are some of the other paradigms? We believed at one time that blacks were intellectually inferior to whites. We said they had a smaller brain, or was it a bigger brain? We thought that they could not be capable of higher levels of thinking, right? And that they should just be slaves. If I owned a slave today, you would call the police, right? We know that there's international slavery and sex trafficking, but it's illegal. It used to be legal at one time to own another human being. Can you imagine? dismantle and demythologize that institution. We would no longer live with slavery in this country, then what? Come up with the rest of my sentence for me. But it was embedded in the U.S. economy. And when I asked the U.S. government to stop selling weapons abroad, they said, well, if we don't sell it, some other country will, and we're, you know, we need to do this to influence it. I said that was the argument we used to use for slavery. That if we didn't sell slaves, the Portuguese would, the Dutch would, the British, the Spanish. But at some point you have to draw a line in the sand and say, no longer will we participate in the barbaric institution of war. It's an embarrassment we don't want to be caught with at some personal level to do violence to another society. I'm wondering if the students would be willing to engage in a little exercise with me. Could you form a human chain from this corner of the room where our audio fellow is, thank you for doing the audio, all the way to our videographer? Would you be willing to just stand up and snake around here in front and down that aisle just for a minute and engage with me in an exercise to demonstrate this point? Our videographer. What is your name?
Cat.
Cat?
Yeah.
You hold the hands all the way to the... Stretch out, stretch out, stretch out, stretch out. Stretch all the way. Stretch all the way. Stretch all the way to the videographer.
Yes, it's me today.
When did we first crawl out of the Rift Valley of Kenya and go upright on our 2 feet, up out of Africa? When did we become Homo sapiens and begin our global journey out of Africa? What year was that?
2.5 million years ago.
Right, right, absolutely. You are 2.5 million years ago. And here we are, we're approaching the Middle East, Tigris, Euphrates, the Nile. Then we went over into India, supposedly, although there's a lot of theories challenging this now. And we went up and through Asia and through China and up through, and we're probably here about maybe about 1 million years ago, and here about 300,000 years ago we start to see evidence of people in Europe, right? In Germany and all throughout Europe. And then we see about 10,000 years in the Middle East that we no longer are hunting and foraging bands on the face of the earth, that we're actually starting to settle down in season cycles and eke out the food we need, the culture of agriculture about 10,000 years ago. And that's when we saw the beginning of the institution of war. We saw 4 institutions: slavery, the state, male chauvinism, and war. And they were interlinked because women were not seen as essential to the defense structure. We bore children and were unreliable and whatnot in this regard. But you also captured other people and they tried to help with the agriculture, with the tilling of the soil. So you captured other tribes and you began the institution of slavery. And then we also built up city-states and fiefdoms, and you begin to gradually see the beginning of the nation-state. And Karl Marx writes about this, that with class conflict comes war. So we also begin to have the divine right of kings. And one day in Europe, somebody said, not who should be king, but whether there should be a king at all. And we began dismantling and demythologizing the divine right of kings. So war, slavery, the state, and male chauvinism all grew up about 10,000 years ago. We actually did not
have wars up until this point, large-scale organized violence on a battlefield. And it's only been in the last 10,000 years that the human race has invented war. And we can uninvent it. We can get rid of war, and you are the beginning of that process. I just want to say that someday I hope that children will ask Mommy and Daddy, what was war?